Okay, it's 6 o'clock, so we will go ahead and call the work session in order for October 24th for Hudsonville Public Schools. All board members are present this evening, so thanks for being here. It's such a nice night. We have 3 good far between of these left, right? So appreciate that. Okay, we'll go ahead and can I have a motion and second to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Motion by Chad Tuttle, support from Andrew DeWitt. Any questions or comments or clarifications on the agenda? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Next, we have recognition of visitors and hearing of people present. Robin, do we have anyone this evening?
We do not tonight.
Okay, no comments this evening. So then we move right into discussion items. First up, we have bond sale resolution preview. So, Mr. Briggs, you're going to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you. So with me tonight, I have Ryan Nicholson from True Law Firm, and Ryan is one of our finance attorneys. And their job, when this is all these bond sales are done and priced and everything, is to make sure that their opinion, I guess, allows it to be a tax-free sale. So that's
Marketable security.
Ryan. That's Ryan's job. And I'm just gonna I'm gonna highlight the resolution and go through it real quick, and then Ryan has some things he's gonna add, and then we'll go through some questions. So if you would look at the very first page, you may be wondering why it's or. And so the heading is there. We've prepared this with in the eventuality to sell the balance of the 2019 authorization, which was $139,925,000. That leaves a balance of $43,325,000. There is also outstanding a refunding that was done in 2013 that currently has a balance of $11.9 million on it. That refunding this authorization, if the board approves it at the regular meeting in November, would give us the authority to refund those bonds as well. You turn over to page 2. It restates that again. Part A talks about the building and site bonds. B goes through the refunder, and C has the total amount stated again, $53,125,000. And then on page 6, going through the highlights, it's pretty big deal. We have had, as a district, long before I got here in 2015, very, very good experience with Stiefel and Nicholas being the underwriters for the bonds, basically the bankers, the people that go find the people who have money to buy bonds. I mean, they're people that know people, and they're in the market, and they've done an excellent job for us, not only being getting all of our bonds placed and getting I would say fully subscribed, getting 2 or 3 bidder for each of those $5,000 coupons, but also hitting our prices and, in our opinion, doing it in a cost-effective, efficient way. So our recommendation in this resolution also is to have Stiefel be the senior underwriter, which means, as with them being senior, not the only, is that they could have co-underwriters or secondary underwriters, which can also add efficiency to a sale also. So they can participate with other sellers. Last time, Ryan just reminded me, there were 2 other underwriters on the $96 million sale.
Which in theory expands the network of individuals that will be bidding on your securities on the sale date.
Yes. Well said. And then if you flip over to page 7, item number 16, that is really the main, these are the details that we're asking on the days the bond sells. These are the details. And the big one there is in C, that both the refunder and the new money bonds, well, not the new money, but the refunder. We won't do the refunder if we're not going to have a savings of 1.5%. I know that was on the mind of a number of you, but that's the minimum level that we would do before we would go to sell the bonds. The price, this is the item A, is basically the fee that can be charged by the underwriter. On both bonds, par amounts, that would be $398,000. Yeah. So those are the highlights of the resolution. This finishes essentially the authorization the voters gave the district when they voted yes on November 5, 2019, and it gives us an opportunity to save some money, not a lot of money, but some money on the 2013 refunding bonds. So, Ryan, I'm sure you have.
Yeah,
things to add to that.
I will add a little bit more. So you'll notice at the top of the resolution, we do have a lot of ors in there. First and foremost, this would be the authorization to, as Pat said, finish up the 2019 voter authorization. That 2020 issue was a par amount of $81,795,000 with some premium in there, bringing us to total proceeds for the projects of about $96 million. So this this authorization for 43 will make it the second and final series of bonds from that authorization. So we have that as one option as a standalone. This authorization also has the refunding bonds as a standalone as well, which is probably not going to happen as a standalone because we want to get more funds for the project. But as Pat pointed out, there is the opportunity to potentially do both issues at the same time. The theory being, and again, your financial advisor, PFM, cranks out the numbers, but the theory is we could realize some economies of scale by issuing the bonds at the same time, cutting down on some of the sort of overhead administrative expenses of going to the market. So if that is possible, and if we are able to hit 1.5% in present value savings, which is sort of a baseline, set here in the authorization, but also in the IRS code and the Michigan Revised Municipal Finance Act. Again, we don't want to be issuing new debt that is worse than old debt. We're only going to be doing it if we see a savings for the community in the tax rolls. So absent a savings, that portion will disappear. So this gives us the flexibility, at least up front, to start thinking about potentially doing a refunding. And if we don't hit the savings that is good for the community, then it will disappear and we will just do the school building and site bonds.
Can I ask a question on page 7, paragraph 21? I'm assuming that's pretty boilerplate language, and is that what we've experienced in the past as well?
Oh, on the
Conflict of interest, possibly?
Yeah, we include that in all of our resolutions. In certain circumstances, we serve as underwriters counsel for certain underwriters, including Stiefel. So when they are using different bond counsel, we will work with Stiefel to issue debt from that transaction. Hence, we have within here the stating of the conflict waiver and then also a conflict waiver attached as well.
And we did that previously?
When we've done these in the past,
Yes.
Stiefels have their own counsel.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
This is
so
new.
so as legal counsel, yes, we would never be on the same side of the same transaction. That would be yes, that gets people this far.
It's really interesting because his partner, Jeff Souls, the back and forth between Jeff and Steeples Council is entertaining sometimes.
Yes, Stiefel will have their own counsel for this transaction.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you very much.
So for the structure of the second issuance of the funds, the 43 million, can you talk a little bit about, with this resolution, the future optional redemption of those bonds, knowing that this time when we go to market, these bonds may be at a higher interest rate? Are we making any decisions today, or will the underwriters and others be allowed to structure those bonds in such a way that a certain portion of them are optionally redeemable prior to full maturity?
So I don't know the structure that PFM has. The general structure of bonds going out to market is to allow for optional redemption after 10 years. And that's optional redemption within the district's option. Just like we, may redeem the bonds that were issued March 12, 2013 and 2023. It's generally a 10-year call window.
Everything we have, it's really estimated right now, and it kind of, like on the pricing date last time, we changed the coupon rates to get the premium,
Yeah.
and I think that, because when I asked them today about their schedule, they said it's just a pretty plain Jane estimate. They've got coupon rates.
Well, and I'm seeing it on page 10 where it has boilerplate around optional redemption, but it doesn't have base scope in it. And so,
Yeah.
and I'm fine giving the latitude to work with the underwriter to structure it in such a way that has the maximum benefit, but just knowing that with these bonds, if they're at a higher rate, it's probably more likely that we would redeem these than what we issued a few years ago.
Correct. And we have the blanks in there simply because this is a form. And it could happen that we don't, do they have a stated first year of maturity? We may get to pricing in the first maturity, even though we issue in 2023. The first maturity isn't until May 2025. So we can't quite add the first one in there, but the goal is to have optional redemption.
We've never talked about anything being non-refundable.
If that's the question, yeah.
And then
To give them the flexibility.
And then Pat, you mentioned on the 2013 series, there's 11.9 million outstanding, but this allows for the redemption of 9.8. Is that because we're going to pay down some before?
There will be a May 1 maturity.
Yeah.
That's probably the discrepancy.
Yeah, the May 1 is a 1.58 payment, and that is not refundable callable. I think it's the second. The first one, under the prior law, you could do it early, and this is the second refunding. So that was done in 13, so this May of 13 would be 10 years. So the 24 is refundable.
Yeah, so it's, the district is paying the amount on May 2023, regardless out of debt service. So what really is being refunded is 24 moving forward. Prior to 2017, we could do something called advanced refunders, where you could issue within more than 90 days from the date that you're redeeming. We're not able to do that anymore.
Okay. And then this is authorizing a true interest rate up to 7.5%, but we don't expect that.
No.
It's just if the rates are above that, you can't issue on it.
Right. And they, it's, so the authorization is up to, it could even be, if we were, like, in a sense, look at the cash flow schedule for the bond, like, the payments we have to make to contractors. I would say if we got in a really bad interest environment, we could hold a little bit because we don't need the money as quickly as we're probably gonna get the money. So we could delay a little bit, or we could even do Series 3, get enough money just to get us through a year, and then do a third series.
Yes, and these numbers are not to exceed numbers. They are the authorization that you are giving superintendent to sign a bond purchase agreement after pricing. They can certainly be tweaked. That would require asking TFM for different projections, but that is a not to exceed amount. And they may be slightly, well, I don't want to speak for PFM's numbers, but we have had several transactions where we have to go back to the board after pricing to adjust interest rates.
Because they've been higher than,
Higher, slightly higher than expected. I believe a lot of that volatility, well, I don't want to speak for PFM's numbers,
Sure.
but I have not seen that for a while.
okay.
It's a good point. The bond market has been very volatile. There's been a lot of things happening that are history making. So, but this, as Ryan said, yeah, the not to exceed, not to exceed, not to exceed. They'll advise us on what's going on in the market that day, and it's possible that it just is a bad day. We might not be able to sell that day. We have to go another day.
It
Could be a great day.
could be a great
We're
day.
expecting it. Generally, that's how it goes. Sell them on Wednesday versus Thursday.
And the refunding portion, that could be figured out before the district even goes to pricing, as we're creating the preliminary official statement. PFM will be in your ear.
And those coupons are 4, 4, 4, 3, 3, 3. So, just depends who's in the market that day. Good questions, thank you.
And we will see this for, in November for the resolution?
Action.
Action, good. Okay. Other questions for Ryan or Pat? Good questions, good discussion. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, for coming in, we appreciate it. Okay, next up, we have a new course proposal. Ms. Taylor, are you taking this?
In your agenda this evening, you have a course proposal for recommendation for implementation in the fall of 2023 for a course called The World at War, World War I and World War II. And I have the content experts here to be able to answer any questions that you might have. We've had a conversation about it. Mark is actually the one who, this is Mark Muller, who proposed the course, and this is Michelle Jeske, who is the department chair for social studies at the high school. So we'd just like to invite either one of you to kind of just share a little bit about the course, the intentions of the course, and then we'll answer any questions that you may have. Absolutely.
So this has been a course that I've looked at and wanted to do for quite a while, but the basic idea is a course that covers the end of World War I, the interturn years, and then World War II. Most of the influence and most of the stuff that the students we come into contact with get very little of the content during either world history or U.S. history because it's a relatively short time frame that we have to teach. And truthfully, a lot of the stuff that they get is from video games or movies. So it's kind of an idea to delve into that a little bit deeper and talk about it and see what they actually know or what's been improvised or what's been changed in movies and in the games.
Wanted to go a little bit deeper for those who have high interest in that content area. Working on the trimesters, I think that probably it covers the standards, but this would just go a little bit deeper into some of the other standards that you see listed on the course proposal. As you can see, there's also student data. They did do polling to see what students might be interested. This course would be an elective course, so it would not be a requirement. It's just kind of really providing really a rigorous academic elective for students who have high interest in this area, which I think is always something that we all want to support.
And the idea would be to offer it to offset U.S. History C class that Mark teaches that's more recent history. So A, B, and C, and then this would be like a way to look at a high interest topic of U.S. History B, and maybe do something like a college schedule where it's every even year it's U.S. History C is offered first trimester, and then or it's a trimester, it's always third trimester, something like that where we wouldn't have to hire anybody else. It would be completely neutral.
This is a one trimester, of course, okay. Any idea why this wouldn't be something that would qualify for like AP type course?
They don't offer an AP.
There just isn't anything that.
There are AP like European history classes, but again, that's going to be a really large amount of time.
Okay.
This is more about that specific wedge of time around that issue. I mean, we can look at, and we've talked to some of the teachers about like maybe an AP human geography, or if there's interest. But the other issue is to the teacher commitment to the training, the recruiting kids, all of that. So
Maybe a trimester versus a year class.
Right, right. Yeah, I love this idea, and I guess I was somewhat ignorant that you weren't able to cover as much of this as what this looks like it will, so I really appreciate
they do a great job.
We do
Yeah.
cover quite a bit.
But you still got to condense
But
time.
it is very condensed.
Yes.
Just again, because every day we're adding to it, right? And so we just have to figure out different ways to get content to kids. And this is something that kids are interested in, and that you can make the connection to today, and it impacts stuff. So.
Would you have a textbook for this class, since it's World War I and II? Do they offer a textbook that just covers those areas?
Excuse me, I did not look at a textbook simply because of cost factors, to be honest with you. Pretty much everything we want, we would need, we could find in some aspect online through open to, and then also courses that I've taken that I still have textbooks. So,
There are other schools in our conference that offer this.
Jennison has it.
Remember now. I feel like maybe
And when I was looking, I looked at a couple other schools around here, Jennison, Forest Hills, I think, I know Hamilton has a course like this. So, I'm not just out there.
we could reach out and see if they have them.
So Mark, you hope to teach this?
Yeah.
Good. And I didn't quite catch where the material will come from, not for a textbook, but where the material come from.
Just different things that I've collected.
Okay.
I'm not saying I won't have a textbook, I'm more along the lines I won't have the kids with the textbooks, like a big textbook that they have to go through.
Any outside reading that will be
Yeah.
required to, any idea what that would be?
What, like where I would get it from?
If you're gonna do you're asking about like if there's a novel, a historical
Yeah,
novel, or
yeah.
anything.
Oh, truthfully, I have not thought about using a historical novel or anything. For me, I really want to just delve on what factual stuff. Yeah, I don't necessarily want to take a novel and be like, is this what happened? Is this not what happened? Like, more along the lines of using some of the World War II, World War I stuff that I currently have, and just
Within
adapt to-
textbooks we have.
Yeah, and I'll say, over 18 years of teaching U.S. history A and B, a lot of Christmas gifts are World War II books, and so using those would be great too.
Sounds like an interesting book.
Merry Christmas, here's a World War II book. My favorite loves me.
Do you envision students taking this like prior to AP US history or alongside of it, or how do you see that interaction?
With AP U.S. history, I would say could be either.
Okay.
My guess is probably after.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, Siri. Siri. She wanted to tell you that. Yeah. I would envision more of a junior, senior class, and so you would have maybe some of that overlap from A-Push, but then,
A lot of 10th graders enroll in A-Push, and they have high interest in the area, so.
Do you see this competing with any other history classes in a, just something that
Especially since we're trying to offset it, so it's not the same
Yep.
time as other electives.
makes sense?
Actually, it's to hopefully get more
Yeah.
interested to stay in the social studies.
Absolutely.
The course content looks awesome. I would have loved to have taken this.
I kind of want to take it myself,
My
yes.
son will be very interested in the course. I think what would be helpful at some point is to see the actual curriculum materials and content and be able to understand what would be used, like the course itself looks fantastic.
And that, we can put that together
Absolutely.
before, obviously before the summer, but I mean, over the next couple of months to collect.
Absolutely. So based on our discussion here this evening, we could certainly even look at some items and come back to our first reading with some updates of what that might look like. They are stewards of Hudsonville Public Schools dollars, and so oftentimes, they do come forward with saying, especially on topics such as World War I and World War II, gosh, we've got textbooks that history has changed, right? So let's utilize what we have, but we could certainly work on providing a little bit more clarity to all of you about what those resources are, even if it's the names of the textbooks that we are going to pull from, so.
Yeah, because even if the World War I and World War II, the content is not going to change.
Correct.
So even if the textbook is older, it's
Yeah.
not like it's going to change.
Exactly, yeah.
But if it's board approved curriculum, I too would want to see where the content is coming from.
Yeah, sure. We can do that. We can get you the names of the textbooks that we currently have.
One more quick question, more out of curiosity. Mark, you teach this class, so how does that affect sort of the other classes that you currently teach?
Really wouldn't affect my U.S. History A and B at all.
Okay.
And like I said, I have a U.S. History C class, which is an elective,
Sure.
which is different years,
Okay.
offering more opportunities for kids to get this and stuff.
Good. Other questions, comments? Good. I would echo, great class, love it. I mean, we're not too far removed away from grandparents being in World War II and stuff, right? And I know my kids don't understand that.
Yeah.
And there's one aspect to it, but I like the whole lead up to it and what really transposed during that time period. And the opportunity to see the curriculum material would be awesome. That would be beneficial for the board.
That's no problem at all.
Awesome. Good.
Thank you.
Sounds like there's consensus to move forward then from the board. Any dissents? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see this for our first reading in November. Correct. Thank you.
Your kids are still there, so
You're doing great. They're on time. They're good. They didn't leave. You left the room.
All right. So now we move on to the primary agenda item. Well, I shouldn't say that, but the thing that will take the most time. I'll put it that way. We welcome Mr. Jay Bennett back with us. We all know Jay from his previous work with the board, so thank you for carving out time to be with us here as we move into the superintendent evaluation timeframe here during the year. So Jay is, as I said in the note to the board, is going to walk us through training. Some of us have been through it, some not, but it's a good time to catch everybody back up. And also, please ask any and all questions. And while we have Jay here, great resource for us to answer questions at. So,
yes, please do. As we go through this, please answer any questions that you may have. So I left two packets in front of you. One is a packet of the PowerPoint with some nice little lines alongside it, so you can take notes as we go through. The other is the evaluation instrument itself, and we'll go through that tonight as well. But we'll start with the packet. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me out. I was saying to a couple people on my way in that I didn't know that I was going to be able to squeeze in another short sleeve. I had retired all of these for the year, and it started pulling down all my branded sweaters and fleece and whatnot, and then all of a sudden hit with this. We were just up in Traverse City for our annual conference, and I packed all my sweaters and fleece and got up there, and yesterday was a bit stifling in my branded wear. So I'm glad that I was able to pull this out for at least one more time this fall. All right, so wake up. There we go. So when I think about evaluating the superintendent, I know that as most board members are not trained educators, the concept and the thought of evaluating that professional educator in the superintendent can be something that is daunting, but I promise you that when we get through tonight, you'll be ready to go. We're looking to reduce confusion and tension amongst board members and with the superintendent as it relates to the evaluation. If there's confusion and tension between you and the superintendent on other issues, that's another workshop. Okay. Keep the focus on what's most important for the students of your district. Be confident that you're executing your duties properly. Limit the risks of lawsuits to the district. Our targets for tonight, talking about indicators of superintendent job performance, talking about artifacts of evidence, talking about establishing a plan, and then talking about how we're going to rate the superintendent. You got this. I have all the faith in the world that when we're done tonight, you will be ready to go. Okay, we're going to start talking a little bit about the legal requirements of superintendent evaluation. Now, this is the part of the presentation where I remind you all that I am not a lawyer. Brad doesn't like it when I play a lawyer, so I try not to. If we get too deep into the weeds on any of the legal portions of this, I will refer you to Brad Banasic or Dan Feinberg back at our office. I'm going to hit this on a very high level. Okay, by law, you have to evaluate the superintendent on an annual basis. Doesn't have to happen at any particular time of the year. It just has to happen on an annual basis. Teachers have to be evaluated by June 30. Administrators have to be evaluated by June 30. They have to be evaluated by the end of the school year. Superintendent, not so. Now, you are planning on evaluating your superintendent coming up here in November, December, okay? As long as you continue to evaluate your superintendent every year around that time, then you'll be within adherence to the annual. So they're not necessarily nailing you down. What we did November 2nd last year, we got to do by November 2nd this year. As long as you're around in that general ballpark, then you'll be good. But it needs to happen on an annual basis. We have to assign a rating of highly effective, effective, minimally effective, or ineffective. We have to take into account multiple measures of growth. And that student growth is going to be 40% of the evaluation. 50% is going to be that instrument that you have in front of you, and then 10% is going to be other goals as determined by the board related to the school improvement plan, strategic plan, and possibly some other specialized goals that you have for your superintendent. When we talk about this student growth, it's going to be aggregate student growth of the entire district. So we're going to look at how we evaluated our teachers. That's the data that we'll use to evaluate our building principals, and that's the data that you as a board will then use to evaluate your superintendent. So if a majority of your teachers are found to be highly effective, your building administrators are going to then be found highly effective, and your superintendent by default is going to then also be found highly effective because they're all being rated on that same data. The trick for you as a board is to make sure that you understand the data that's being used and that you understand how that growth model was established, okay? As long as you understand and are in agreement with the superintendent that what we've set for growth is appropriate, then we go forth and evaluate. So let me give you a for instance. If you, for instance, establish a growth metric that says, you know, if 85% of our students show 1% increase in growth, I'm sure most of you would be like, yeah, no, 1% increase in growth is probably not appropriate. We probably should shoot a little bit higher than that. So you would work with your superintendent to figure out something a little bit more reasonable. If your superintendent came back to you and said, 85% of our students are going to show at least 15% growth year over year, then we'll consider that to be effective. And if it's 25%, we'll consider that to be highly effective. Whatever it is, right? We just need to make sure that as a board, we understand the justification for what has been determined to be adequate growth, and then work with the superintendent to get us to a point where we're all in agreement that that's what it is, okay? We as a board are not determining what growth model is going to be used. We as a board are not determining what is and isn't, the right test to use, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be up to your superintendent and his team. All we're making sure is that whatever comes to us, we understand it so that we can evaluate our superintendent with it, and that we think it's appropriate for the kids in our district, okay? So having said that, Doug, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're using student growth for your evaluation?
Sure. So the last couple of years has been challenging with student growth because data does not exist. 2020, we didn't test students. 2021, over 60,000 students were tested. By definition of school code, section 380, 1249, you have to have 3 consecutive years of data to show student growth. You can't just show from one year to the next. You're supposed to show 3 consecutive years, the 3 most recent years, otherwise teachers don't have valid data to use. So what we've done is take the scores for the county, and we take the scores for Hudsonville, and we establish the standard deviation, and if we're more than one standard deviation above the county, then that would be highly effective, or if we're within one standard deviation, that would be effective. If we're below, within one, it would be ineffective, or minimally effective, and if it's more than one standard deviation below, then it would be ineffective.
And if you're more than one standard deviation above,
It
then
would
it's
be highly
highly
effective. So we have the four, if you take the line, the regression line, and then you take Hudsonville's regression line, you have a standard deviation for the county, and then you determine are we more than one, within one, more than one, below, or more than one below. If that makes sense.
And to Doug's point, he's exactly right. The state has determined that they want you to use the 3 most recent years of data that you have available to you. They've given districts quite a bit of flexibility, and they basically said to districts, you have numerous options. One of the options that some districts are taking is they're leaning more heavily on the local assessments, because it's that M-STEP data that we're missing those 3 years of data worth, right? Because we skipped M-STEP for an entire year. So they're letting districts lean more heavily on NWEA or other local forms of assessment that they're using, okay? The other option is they are allowing districts to go back and use the most recent 3 years of consistent data that they have, which means that districts are reaching back to pre-pandemic test scores. Probably not the most ideal, but we have some districts that have elected to go that route. But the state has, again, created quite a bit of flexibility in determining growth, knowing that we are missing that year of data. And it's going to be, I think next year, we should then have 3 years
Still one
of.
short.
It's 2 years, okay. 2 years, then we'll have 3 years of consistent data.
This was one way for us to use data for multiple grades, multiple English and math. I can tell you a couple local districts are simply using the SAT data at the high school, and the whole district is the same score.
Yeah.
So this gave us some sort of sense of how does this impacted by 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. And it's in English and math versus just one score.
Okay? Yeah.
Go ahead. No,
So
go ahead.
it sounds like what you just described is pretty typical for what other schools in the area are doing.
Ours is a little bit more in depth,
Okay.
only because a grade level could affect the
Sure.
score adversely,
Right.
where theirs is just one score. Sure, some we're looking at, I mean, in all honesty, attendance rates can be used
Right.
as a score. There's no classification, so we're trying to kind of get into the weeds a little bit more on how our students are performing. We looked at in correlation to the state, but our scores are substantially higher than the state. We thought the county gave us some good indicators, because it's still local, it's still here. And there are some schools that perform equally as well. I will tell you that our kids do well.
Do we ever look at like size, like you know how we're compared to, I'm trying to think of some of the other school districts that we're compared to that are not in Ottawa County.
We've looked at that, but I think this is more of a local thing versus looking at what the financial situation over is at Okemos or Birmingham or things like that. So we looked at just what was happening in the county.
Not necessarily financial, but you know how we looked at other ones with scores that are like-minded?
Yeah, I understand. I'm saying
I'm trying to
because
compare
they're
apples to
they're so
apples.
different all over. I mean, if you look at like schools by scores, then there would be not much of a regression line amongst them because they'll be the same.
But you're kind of highlighting, like, when we looked at that data, we looked at Novi, we looked at
Birmingham,
Clarkston.
Birmingham, we looked at
Rockford,
Yeah.
Rockford,
Zealand.
yeah.
So we're comparing apples to apples with districts that are very similar to us.
Statewide.
Aren't they looked at like free and reduced lunch? Isn't that all looked at in those districts?
That was the data set that I pulled.
Yeah.
Yes, it was like size as well as free and reduced lunch.
Yeah,
Those
so
were the
wouldn't
two
we want to
criteria.
compare to districts like that to get a more
Not
accurate?
So
for the
that-
evaluation
No.
component for all of our teachers. I mean,
Right.
This is for teachers, for administrators, for all of them.
So that kind of data is very effective when you're looking at long-term strategic planning goals and things of that nature, that data for sure, see how we compare to other districts that are similar to us. But for this kind of evaluation, we're looking at how our teachers are doing with our students in our district, because that's what we use to evaluate our administrators and then eventually our superintendent.
Right, but what I struggle with is if we're comparing to districts just within our area, if we typically outperform our other school districts, then how are we, and I get the 1% standard deviation, but if we consistently rank higher, then where are we aiming to go? Because we historically rank higher.
Right. So this is
Are we
what we're.
just giving in the
right.
effect, highly
Well,
effective
this is
without-
what we're doing in the interim. Okay, so this is an interim fix. Once we get back to the point where we have 3 years of consistent data for our students, then we're comparing how our students are growing in our district. But because we don't have that 3 years of consistent data right now, Doug's team has decided to kind of go a different route with this and look at how we're doing compared to other districts, just to kind of give us an idea as to whether we're seeing appropriate growth based on how we compare to other districts, because we don't have those 3 years of data. Ideally, we're going to take a look at this year's 6th graders, take a look at their scores in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and see if those students are growing in the M-STEP tests and in our local assessments and everything. But because we don't have those 3 years of data, we're making do with what we do have.
I get that. I just want to make sure that we're doing a fair and accurate evaluation.
Yeah,
That's
so
just
based
my
on what
concern.
I'm seeing other districts do, I think that you're going above and beyond,
Okay.
would be
But,
my.
so, yeah, and then you're saying that, you're looking internally at growth and how we're doing to growth, a good tactical, if you will, evaluation tool, but then looking at other districts, the Rockfords, the Novis, et cetera, yeah, that's a strategic going, okay, what are they doing differently than what we're
Sure.
doing overall within the district? Could be curriculum, could be supports, could be a number of different things.
Right.
And that's where we look at that data and go, okay, how can we benchmark that?
Absolutely.
To
And
help
to your
us do
superintendent's
that.
point, I mean, he's absolutely right. There are some districts that are using things like attendance.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's, I personally, from an academic standpoint, that's not telling me anything about academic achievement, right? So I think that the model that you're using is above and beyond what I've been seeing in other districts, for sure.
And we're, M-STEP or STAR we're going to use? Help me out again.
M-STEP,
We're going to use
state
M-STEP.
assessment.
Okay, so the local, our
We do
local
use
is
a
STAR,
local.
but we're not using STAR on this. Okay.
And when will we be back to having 3 years? Are we a year away from that or 2 years?
2 years. Yep. Okay.
This will be the first year we have. This will be the second year and the third year.
Yeah. We have to, by law, evaluate our superintendent on the effectiveness of the annual evaluation system that's in place. So what that means is, if all of our teachers are being evaluated by the end of the school year, all those reports are being reported to the state, all of the building administrators that are responsible for administering the evaluation using 5D, okay, there you go, that's a guess. So they're using 5D, so just like you're getting trained in this evaluation instrument tonight, your building principals or whoever's responsible for evaluating the teachers are trained in 5D. If all that's happening, along with anybody that needs an improvement plan is being put on an improvement plan, all those things are happening consistently across the district, then you can find your superintendent to be effective or highly effective in this area of having that annual evaluation system, okay? We have to evaluate our superintendent on progress towards goals, and again, those goals are going to be school improvement goals, strategic planning goals, any goals that we as a board have set for our superintendent, above and beyond what's in the instrument itself, okay? Pupil attendance. We have to evaluate our superintendent on pupil attendance. Now, this is not evaluating our superintendent on whether pupil attendance is good, bad, or indifferent. It's more on what systems do we have in place to deal with pupil attendance, and are they effective or not? So if we've established that we have an issue with truancy, what are we doing to address that? Do we need to reevaluate our policies, our procedures, whatever it is? So what policies and procedures do we have in place for dealing with attendance? Okay, and do they make sense and are they effective? Things of that nature. Student, parent, and teacher feedback. All right, now, this is one that districts get hung up on quite a bit. In fact, I answered a phone call on this one just today. When we talk about the feedback for this evaluation, we are not talking about their feedback on superintendent job performance. It lies with U7, and U7 only are responsible for evaluating the superintendent. When we talk about student, parent, and teacher feedback, we're talking about their feedback about the district and the processes and systems that your superintendent has in place for obtaining that feedback, okay? Effective superintendents tend to be reactive. Highly effective superintendents tend to be proactive. So when it comes to feedback, an effective superintendent, a reactive superintendent, answers the phone when it rings, or buzzes, or vibrates, answers the text messages, answers the emails, answers their name when called out at the grocery store or the football game or whatever else. That's a reactive, effective superintendent. A proactive, highly effective superintendent doesn't wait for the phone to ring. He makes the phone calls. She makes the phone calls. They send out the emails. They send out the surveys. They set up meetings with those parent groups, with those teacher groups. They attend the meetings, right? They don't wait to be called out at the grocery store or at the football game. They do the calling out. They see people in the community and they talk to them and get their feedback for how things are going in the district, okay? So that's the kind of feedback we're talking about. So if when it comes time for the next strategic plan, if your superintendent has a system in place for getting feedback from all of those groups, then that would be effective or highly effective, okay? When it comes time for figuring out how the bond money is being spent, and there's a system in place. We're going to send out a survey, we're going to have a set of public meetings, we're going to sit down, we're going to take all that data, we're going to report back out, we're going to take the top 5, determine whether or not they're feasible, I mean, all that kind of stuff, right? If there's a clear plan and system in place and it makes sense, that's the kind of feedback that we're evaluating our superintendent on, okay? Does that make sense? This is not a 360 evaluation, all right? So we're not surveying the staff, say, hey, how's the superintendent doing? Do you think he's a good superintendent? That's not what we're doing, okay?
You're evaluating the system for collecting. the process
Exactly,
for collecting
exactly.
data.
Yep.
As a proactive, okay.
Highly effective. If you find your superintendent to be highly effective for 3 consecutive evaluations, then you can go to every other year evaluations. However, we don't recommend that you ever not evaluate your superintendent. So if you have 3 years of highly effective, even in those off years, we think that you should still do an evaluation, but it doesn't need to be as comprehensive as going through the scoring instrument that we'll talk about in a little bit. You can do just a much less formal or much more informal process in those off years, and then in the on years, then you can do the formal process of self-evaluation, going through the instrument and doing the whole thing, okay? But if you have a superintendent that's highly effective for 3 consecutive years, then you can go to those every other year evaluations, as long as they remain highly effective. If you find your superintendent to be effective, or minimally effective, or ineffective, then the clock starts over, okay? If you find your superintendent to be minimally effective or ineffective, you have to, by law, put them on an improvement plan. And if you find them to be minimally effective or ineffective for 3 consecutive years, you have to, by law, dismiss them, okay? You have to comply with the Open Meetings Act. We'll talk about that in a little bit. You have to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. We'll get into that as well. On your website somewhere, you need to have this link. And this link basically goes back to the research base, the testing base, the validity, all that of our instrument. And so as long as you include that link somewhere, it's going to cover all of these things that have the check marks here. So that's just a simple add. Just make sure that's on your website somewhere, and then you'll be in compliance. And I'm sure it probably already is. Okay. Any questions about the legal aspects of evaluation? All right. So, thinking about a time that you've been evaluated. So, anybody have an evaluation story? Anybody have a time of a time they've been evaluated in their job and things went either horribly wrong or horribly right that they'd like to share?
I don't know about horribly right, but I find the best evaluations that I've gotten are always not a surprise. So they're just a formal documentation of discussions you've been having with your supervisor or your employee, depending on where you're at, throughout the year. Those, and again, you're going through the formal process, but you know what you've seen already.
Let it be known that I did not pay Ken ahead of time to say this.
You did not, right?
I did not. Because that's exactly it, okay? This is a formative developmental process. This is not a hit the superintendent over the head with the evaluation, look at all the things you've done wrong, okay? This should be a developmental formative process. We want this to be an opportunity for our superintendent to continue the things that are working well and to work on those things that aren't working well and to grow in all areas in which we think that there is room for growth. So I can think of an evaluation that I was part of in which at the end of the evaluation cycle, I sat down with my administrator and they reached into their bag and they pulled out a pad of paper much like this And, listed on it was, kind of like this, right? It had just a whole list of things, except there were like 4 pages of it. I'm like, geez, am I really that bad? And what it turned out was, anytime throughout the year that I did something that they did not approve of, appreciate, think I did right, whatever, they would note it down. And then when I sat down for my year-end evaluation, they said, okay, so this is, November, right? April 15th. I'm like, tax day, yeah, what about it? Well, I asked you to do this, you did it, but not in the way that I wanted you to do it. I'm like, well, did you say something to me on April 15th? No. Wrote it down on my pad of paper and waited until the end of the year evaluation so they could dump it on me, right? That dump truck, back that dump truck and just dump all the things you've been doing wrong for the entire year. That's not going to work for us here. If we have an issue with something that our superintendent is doing, then we're going to let them know. Conversely, to Ken's point, we need to make sure that the superintendent is letting us know on a regular basis the progress is being made towards the goals that we've set, the progress is being made towards the bond issue, all this building that's going on, the progress is being made towards the new classes that we're implementing, all of that, right? So that, again, to Ken's point, when we get to that year-end evaluation, there is no surprise. It's a year-end evaluation, it's a year-long process, okay? Yes?
I agree, Jay. Nothing should ever come as a surprise, and I've given multiple evaluations in my career. I think one of the things that I struggle with, and this is not specific to Hudsonville, this is the state, is the highly effective is your rating system. It seems like everyone thinks they're highly effective, and where I've come from, you pretty much have to walk on water to get a highly effective. We would expect, like, meets expectations. But in K through 12, it seems like if you are effective, that's like a bad rating, and everyone's got to be highly effective. So that's what I struggle with.
Yeah.
It's not specific to Hudsonville. I
No.
think from a statewide, I hate to say this, but it doesn't seem quite right. Everyone's highly effective. Like, that's the normal.
So everybody's
where-
highly effective, and yet our academic test scores haven't changed significantly over the past 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like we would be at like meets expectations.
So here's the thing. So we have the system that we have. In Jay's world, which, let me tell you, Jay's world, fantastic place. I mean, I wish we could all live there in Jay's world. In Jay's world, I would be happy with a state full of effective superintendents. I would. If every superintendent in the state was effective, that would be
Yeah,
fantastic.
they're doing their job.
Exactly. What I know to be true, though, is that we have highly effective superintendents, we have effective superintendents, we have minimally effective superintendents, we have ineffective superintendents. I know that to be true, okay? But that's not how it generally always comes out in this evaluation that we use. So we do the best that we can with this evaluation in using what it is that the law has given us.
But it's not even the superintendent, it's the teachers.
Teachers, everything,
evaluations, too.
right.
Your
But
system's not
because
very
we
right.
only
I
have
hate to
one
say
employee
but it's not
that we're
right.
responsible for evaluating, and that's a superintendent, that's where my focus lies,
Right.
right? Because as a board, we only evaluate the one employee. So I completely understand your frustration with the system. I
When
wholeheartedly
you work
agree.
for the system, does any of that go back to the system to try to make it better?
So the legislators created the system, so the legislators would have to then modify the system. Or MDE would have to modify, make a recommendation to the legislators, and the legislators would have to then buy in to making those modifications. And there have been a variety of things that they have considered. So we started this whole evaluation process with 25% of the evaluation being based on growth, and then we eventually moved to 40%. There's been talk about taking us back to 25%. It's not gone anywhere. There's been talk about eliminating growth completely from the process. Again, has not gone anywhere. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, I
Just
get
trying to
it.
understand.
So my suggestion is always to talk with your legislators and let them know that as a board member, you're not completely convinced that this evaluation process is what it could be, or what it should be.
Is there any aggregate data on the bell-shaped curve or the cliff?
Right. So yeah, so you're talking about the bell curve, and so ideally, most people will be in the middle, and that's kind of where our effectives should be, and then we'll have some highly effectives on the outskirts, and we'll have some minimally effectives and ineffectives on the out. I mean, you can pull any of the rating data, from the state. They have all the evaluations. At the end of every year, there's a report that's sent to the state. It's called the REP report, and in that REP report is the ratings for all the teachers and administrators and superintendent. So that's all reported to the state. CEPI has all that data. You can access all that data, and you can take a look at where all the ratings fall. I'm not familiar with them right off the top of my head, but I know that you can look at that data, for sure.
I know we're not going to change the system tonight, but
No, I'm just trying to
the
understand.
conversation has been ongoing. And the question is, when we recommend all of our teachers to you, would you be okay if we recommended a bell-shaped curve teachers? Or do you want us to hire highly effective people? And I think from a board standpoint, you want to hire highly effective
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
And so I wouldn't want to hire a highly effective person and then fit them into a bell-shaped curve. I would hope that a district, particularly like Hudsonville, maybe Western Michigan, I don't know, I can't speak for every district, but you don't hire on a bell-shaped curve. You hire on, you're trying to find a highly effective person in every role for every position. It's not any, you don't just pull random people off the street and fit them into the curve. So I think that's the conversation.
I'm just trying to understand the rating system. So you're highly effective, in my world, is it meets expectations. Kind of.
I don't think that's-
And I know because you're in higher ed, I don't know if that's something that your particular department chooses, or if they're also held by some of the same standard. And I can tell that because you've been in your system for so long, it's hard to relate to a different system because it doesn't seem to compare.
No, it's
And
just
I don't know the answer to that,
Yeah.
but I think recognizing that there are separate systems, whether we necessarily like the system in K-12 versus what we do in higher ed.
But most of my career has not been in higher
Right.
ed, it's been in healthcare.
Right.
And so I look at my healthcare experience when I was in administration and
Sure.
giving evaluations. I'm just seeking to understand.
Absolutely.
That's all.
And as we get into the instrument a little bit, hopefully I can provide a little bit of clarity on that. Okay. So let's look at the research base on which the instrument was built. We took a look at a lot of research in which to build this, and so we have what we think is a tool that is built in significant research. So we have these standards that are kind of setting the pace. So if you open up your evaluation instrument itself and go to, I believe it's page 8, and yeah, there you go, page 8. And you see under B1 there, you see there's two little footnoted numbers. There's a 1,8 in that first column, okay? So that 1,8, the 1 refers to standard 1 here on the research base that we're talking about. And then the 8 refers to standard 8, which we'll get to in a minute, okay? But that's what those little footnoted numbers refer to, okay? So if you see them, they're talking about these standards. As we look through these standards, there's a reoccurring theme throughout here. See if you can pick out what it is. So we start with standard 1, talking about mission, vision, and core values. We know that effective leaders develop, advocate, and enact a shared mission, vision, and core value statements for the values of high-quality education, academic success, and well-being of each student. We know that those districts that are successful in moving the academic needle are those districts that are driven by a mission, a vision, and a set of core value statements. Now, do we have a strategic plan in Hudsonville?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a mission statement, a vision statement, and a set of core beliefs that are part of that mission, that are part of that strategic plan? Okay. Do we as a board know what they are? And are we making sure that everything that we do as a board is in adherence to that mission, vision, set of value statements, and towards the completion of those goals that we set forth in the strategic plan?
Room for improvement.
Okay. So I can think of a board that in their board meeting room, on their wall that they all face, they actually have across the top their mission statement, underneath that their vision statement, underneath that each of the 5 goal areas that they're working on, and progress. And they're all on big placards so that it's plastered, like this entire wall would be covered with those statements. So that every night that the board gets together, they're literally facing their mission, vision, and belief statements, right? And they're facing the goal statements that they have. So when they start to get hung up on discussions around what are our school colors? What's that? Maize and blue. So when we start getting hung up on those discussions on whether or not the basketball tank top should be maize and the shorts should be blue or the other way around, we remember that at the end of the day, the colors of the uniforms are probably best left to the athletic directors and the booster clubs, and that probably doesn't really fall into our mission, vision, and belief statements, so what we as a board should be concerned about, okay? We need to keep our focus on academic success and well-being of each student, okay? Ethics and professional norms. Effective leaders act ethically and according to professional norms. Equity and cultural responsiveness. Effective leaders strive for equity of educational opportunities, culturally responsive practices to promote each student's academic success and well-being. We're starting to see that theme there. Academic success and well-being of every student in the district. Does that mean every kid going to college? No, it means every kid is ready for what's next, okay? For some of our graduates, what's next is college. It's community college, it's trade school, it's the military, it's right into the workforce. It's a gap year, travel across Europe, and then come back and jump into college. Whatever it is, right? Are we preparing our students for what's next? And that's what it comes down to. School improvement. Effective leaders act as agents of continuous improvement. Curriculum instruction and assessment. Effective leaders develop and support intellectually rigorous, coherent systems of curriculum. Community of care and support. Effective leaders cultivate the inclusive, caring, and support of school community. Professional capacity of school personnel. Effective leaders develop the professional capacity of their personnel. We train our staff. We make sure that we provide methods of training for our staff. We as a board need to support funding for that professional development, okay? We need to train up our staff. We want them to be, to your superintendent's point earlier, highly effective. And if they're not, we want to provide them training to get them there. Given the choice between 5 years of rock star and 10 years of mediocrity, I'll take 5 years of rock star every time, even if that means that we lose them to another district or to another career, to something else. We had them for 5 years and they were a rock star while they were here. That's fantastic. I'll take that over 10 years of mediocrity every time. In my role as a facilitator of superintendent searches, I regularly reach out to districts when I see that they're in the process of needing a superintendent because their superintendent's retiring, going off to another job, whatever it is. I had a district and I knew, before I even called this board president, I knew what they were going to tell me because this district had not hired an external employee to be their superintendent in like 40 years. So I knew as soon as I called him and offered any help along the way, he would thank me very politely, but say, nope, we know exactly who our next superintendent's going to be. And they could point to 5 districts within a 30-mile radius that had superintendents that at one point were a teacher in their system. They were like a farm club for superintendents, okay? That is a district that was supporting that professional capacity of their school personnel. They were training them up. They were getting ready for what's next. Not all of them wanted to be an administrator. Some of them just wanted to be a better teacher. So they were making sure they were trained for that as well, okay? Professional community for teachers and staff. Effective education leaders foster that professional community. They treat their teachers like the professionals that they are. All right? This is what a highly effective superintendent does. Meaningful engagement of families and community. Effective leaders engage families in the community. Operations and management. Effective leaders manage school operations and resources. Some additional research. Meta-analysis, which is research on the research. District level leadership has an impact on student achievement. That cuts both ways. Positive, productive, district-wide leadership has a positive, productive impact on academic achievement. If we have poor district-level leadership, we're going to see either no improvement or we're going to see anti-improvement, if that's even a word, right? Numbers are going to go down instead of up. Effective superintendents focus their efforts on creating those goal-oriented districts like we talked about. And superintendent tenure has an impact on student achievement. Generally speaking, the longer a superintendent is in a district, the higher the chances are that we're going to see that improvement in academic achievement. Effective superintendents include all relevant stakeholders in this process. Again, thinking of a time I was in a district and I'm working with the board and the superintendent says, hey, can we take a break? I said, sure. As we're coming out of break, superintendent starts dropping off packets of paper around at all the board table spots. And the board members start looking through this packet of paper, and I can tell by the look on their eyes that they have no idea what it is that they're looking at. And so board president, as we come back for break, says, so what? Superintendent says, oh, that's the new strategic plan. And the board is like, what do you mean? That's what? Well, you know, I sat down with my cabinet and we put together a plan for the next 3 to 5 years. No board input, no staff input, no community input, no student input. Any guesses as to how that went over with the board? Yeah, like a lead balloon, right? If they had implemented that plan, how did that gone over with the teachers and the community members and the parents? No, no way. They would not embrace it because it's like they weren't part of it. You didn't ask us what we thought. If you want them to be part of that plan, if you want them to enact that plan that you put in place, you have to get their input. And that's what effective and highly effective superintendents do. Effective superintendents ensure that the collaboration or the collaborative goal setting results in non-negotiables in 2 areas, student achievement and classroom instruction. And those districts that are successful in moving the academic needle are those districts in which the board and superintendent come together and agree that those are the non-negotiables, that student achievement and instruction are the non-negotiables. Continually monitoring district progress. Effective superintendents are those that are continually monitoring that progress of the district and reporting it to you as a board on a regular basis. Effective superintendents ensure that the necessary resources, including time, money, personnel, are in place. You can have the best plan in the world, but if you don't have the resources in which to carry it out, it's not going to be successful. So we need to put together that plan, but then make sure that we have everything behind it. 30 years of research on the practices and behavior of superintendents. We believe that this evaluation instrument was constructed around what we know it is that effective superintendents do. Any questions about the research base for the tool? All right. Using the instrument itself, there are 5 performance categories for the evaluation instrument. Governance and board relations, community relations, staff relations, business and finance, instructional leadership. It is not an accident that 3 of those 5 areas have the word relations in them. Because we know that effective and highly effective superintendents, based on the research, we know are those that have positive and productive relationships with their board, positive and productive relationships with their community, positive and productive relationships with their staff. If they have those 3 things, they're 3/5 of the way there, okay? Business, finance, instructional leadership, you got a 5-tool superintendent for you baseball fans out there. If you have yourself a 5-tool superintendent, grab on, hold on. That's what you want. Don't let them go, or her, or them. Okay, so the rubric, that's the instrument that you have in front of you, lists a set of criteria which defines and describes the important components of the work being evaluated. It helps demystify the process, I promise you. So if we could turn to page, I think it's 5 in that evaluation instrument, the one that says A1. 4, thank you, page 4. Across the top, governance and board relations, A, that's your performance category. So like I said, we've got 5 of those for this instrument. Each of those individual boxes is your performance indicator. It's written in a progressive level language. And so I like to think about it as the and more. In order to get from ineffective to minimally effective, we have to do everything in the ineffective box and more. To get from minimally effective to effective, everything in the minimally effective box and more. To get from effective to highly effective, everything in the effective box and more. Okay? The performance level is across the top there. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at each of these performance categories. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at A. So take a few minutes and read through the indicators in A and let me know if there's one in particular that you would like to take a deeper dive on. I'll give you just a few minutes to look through those. All right, any of those A1 through A6 jump out at you? If you don't pick one, I will.
I'm not gonna pick one either, so yeah.
I think we talked extensively about goals from a student growth perspective, but maybe A2 in terms of goal development.
Yeah, okay. So goal development, effective, facilitates the development of short-term goals for the district, provides the necessary financial strategies to meet those goals. Highly effective, has a system in place for establishing, reporting on, and monitoring goals. Budget practices help to ensure alignment of resources to goals. So again, you'll notice in a lot of these in that highly effective area, it's built around the systems that they have in place. So again, that goes back to that reactive versus proactive. That reactive, effective superintendent just kind of reacts. Oh, we need to set some goals? Okay, let's set some goals, right? As opposed to that proactive superintendent, that highly effective superintendent that has that system in place for monitoring progress, monitoring what's going on in the district, and then determining, okay, so this is the area in which we need to start to develop some goals, and this is the process we're going to use to do that. We're going to sit down, we're going to create a survey, we're going to send that survey out to everybody, we're going to collect the results of that survey. We'll then have a meeting where we go over the top results from the survey. Once we have the top results from the survey, we'll start to figure out how that's going to, affect the budget, what moves we need to make, whether we need to have a bond, right, for the buildings that we're putting into place. So whatever it is that we need to do, those changes that we need to make, but we have that system in place. It's not just kind of throw something at the wall and hope it sticks. We have that system in place for the development of those goals, okay? So that's what it's talking about there, that difference between effective and highly effective is having that system in place and then using that system every time we get to a space where we need to create goals for whatever it is, okay? A1 through A6, anything else jump out at you there? Because we're working with the board, I always like to look at A5, board questions, okay? So effective for board questions are addressed with follow-up to I'll come back to that in a second. All right, so board questions are addressed with follow-up to all board members. Highly effective, again, having that system in place for receiving and responding to board member questions in a timely and thorough manner. So that just means that every time a question is asked, he uses the same system for replying to that question. And you'll note that for effective, board questions are addressed with follow-up to all board members. I mean, I don't know about you, but to me, that's a pretty low bar. I mean, that's pretty much the way it should be, right? We ask a question, we should get a response and a follow-up to all board members. But again, I can't tell you how many superintendents I have that they will get that question from Ken, and then they'll answer Ken. The problem there, though, is that one of the rest of you might have had that same question. And now you don't get an answer to that because he only answered the person that asked him the question. A highly effective superintendent knows, okay, you know what, Ken asked that question, chances are pretty good someone else might have the same question, but even so, let's just make sure everyone understands. So, doesn't even have to say, just shoots out an email to all 7 of you. Remember, one-way emails, information, not a violation of the OMA. So he just sends out an email and says, hey, board member, doesn't need to say who it was, just says, board member had a question about this, whatever it is, the food service contract that we had in the meeting. Board member had a question about it, here's your answer, sends out to all 7 of you. All 7 of you have that same set of information. Everyone got an answer to that question. That's what a highly effective superintendent does, and does it every time, okay? Highly effective superintendent knows that keeping that communication open and straight and all-inclusive is the best way to address these problems. Now, if one of you sends him a message about what time the football game is on Friday night, maybe he doesn't need to send that to all of you, but he could, or he could just remind everybody that, hey, that's in my weekly update coming up. All right. Anything else here, A1 through A6, jump out at you?
Can I just do a follow-up to what you
Yeah.
said? Because I think this goes to one of the things that we talked about, the whole issue with Open Meetings Act and having, meetings, because the instant someone hits reply all, is that where the problem lies?
That's where the problem lies.
Okay,
So don't reply all.
yes.
If you have a follow-up to the superintendent, then reply just to that sender, to the superintendent, reply to the superintendent, hey, just a follow-up on that. And the superintendent can reply back to everybody, hey, someone had a follow-up, here's the answer to that follow-up, okay? Again, one-way sharing of information, not a violation. But when a discussion starts, that's when we get into the violation, Okay? Anything else A1 through A6?
Just to be clear, is that with the superintendent involved, or is that true for the entire board?
That would be true for the entire board.
Okay.
So one-on-one,
Yep.
if you email the president,
Yep.
and the president, and this, I mean, this could, this could work in this instance as well. So you email the president a question, the president's like, wow, I wonder if anybody else has that question. And then the board president emails all of you, and again, one way, says, hey, I got this question, here's the answer. As long as it stops there, you're all good. Now, if someone hits reply all and says, well, yeah, but what about that? Okay, now we're starting to get down that road of having a conversation, and then that's a no-no, right? So again, one-way information, sharing of information one way, not an issue. We start replying all, start having conversations, then we have an issue. Okay? All right, let's turn to page 7 and look at B1 through B6. Now you'll note B1 parent feedback, you notice how that's kind of a reddish-orange color there? Anytime in that first column you see something that's kind of that reddish-orange, that is something that is explicitly laid out in the evaluation law. So all those things we talked about at the very beginning about the legal considerations, by law you have to consider that system for having, for getting that parent feedback. And that's why that one's kind of in red when the rest of them are in bold black, okay? So looking at that one for parent feedback, effective, readily accepts parent input and engages parents in district-wide goal setting and decision-making. So it's that accepting, right? Readily accepting. Answering that phone call, answering those emails, responding when their name is called out. That's that effective, that reactive. Highly effective, actively seeks parental input. So making the phone calls, sending out the emails, sending out the surveys. Creates methods for parents to be actively involved in decision-making as well as setting and supporting district-wide goals. So I can think of a superintendent that would, on a routine basis, every month, would get together with all the PTA and PTO presidents and vice presidents in the district and have a monthly meeting with them. Knowing that that meeting was happening, the PTA presidents and vice presidents could then meet with their PTAs and say, hey, don't forget, next month, next week, whatever, I'm meeting with the superintendent, so give me your, stuff. And so then they would have that meeting, superintendent would say, okay, so hey, these are the things that are going on in the district, please take all this back to your PTAs and PTOs. What do you have for me? And then the PTA and PTO presidents and vice presidents could then say, well, I'm from so-and-so elementary school, and we're really having some consistent problems with the high school kids coming over on the lunch and, yelling things at our kids as they play soccer out there. I don't know, whatever it is, right? But, they can report those things back to the superintendent, and that's one way a superintendent can get that information. Surveys, showing up to PTA, PTO meetings, whatever it is. As a board, what you need is just some examples from the superintendent so that you can then make that evaluation, right? Because you're not following him around, at least none of you are following him around out there, right? Okay. So, you just need to report. And just say, okay, hey, just give us an idea. How often are you meeting with these groups, or how often do you send out a survey, or when it comes time for that strategic plan, what's the process that you're using to get their input? So as long as you can make a judgment as to the processes and systems that are in place, then you can appropriately evaluate. Okay?
To that point, Jay, should the superintendent be rating themselves on their own evaluation?
We'll get to that.
Okay, thank you.
We will get there. Okay, anything else here, B2 through B6, jump out at you? We talked about parent feedback. B3, community feedback, same thing, just now we're talking about community instead of parents. And obviously the difference between the community and parents is our community are those members of our community that don't currently have any students in the school. They may have had students in our school at one point. They may have never had students in our schools, but they're still part of our school community. They still vote on our board elections and our bond elections and everything else. We still want to be, they still use our facilities, they still, rent out our gyms and our classroom space, all that kind of stuff. So we still want to be involved with them and get their feedback in this process. But as community members, they don't necessarily have a student in the school, so they don't have a daily presence in our districts.
Media relations is always an interesting one.
Media relations, so effective, promotes positive relations and provides the media with district event information. Highly effective, initiates, establishes a system for actively engaging the media to promote the district and provide timely and effective information. And again, it's that actively engaging. That's what takes it from waiting for the press to call versus sending out that press release, calling the press, hey, we got this thing going on, it sure would be great if Wood TV8 would show up with a couple cameras, that'd be fantastic, we'd really like to promote this, right? And they're always looking for stuff. They're always looking for stuff to report on because they're so sick of reporting on all the garbage. They love to, prop up the districts and really, showcase that good stuff that's happening. So an effective superintendent, highly effective superintendent, is making sure that happens. And not just the athletic stuff, the academic stuff too. All of it. Okay?
As a side note, in the past, as a board, in some respects, we encouraged our superintendent not to do that, honestly. I mean, when I first was on, it was like, you know what? Don't be like a neighboring school district where he's always on media. He's always the one answering the question when there's an issue.
Yeah.
And that has maybe changed with social media, but give me your perspective on that.
I think there's a happy medium there.
Okay.
Okay. So I will tell you that there is a recently established Kent County superintendent that I've known for a long time. And in his previous stints, he was very active on Twitter, very active in social media. I'll be very interested to see if he continues that with the new district. I don't know, but that was kind of his thing. And it always worked very well for him. Okay? So you've got to kind of work with your superintendent to determine their comfortableness, work with the rest of your board to determine your comfortableness with it. But I think there's a happy medium there. But what we don't want is we don't want to kind of live in a bubble and not ever talk about all the great things happening in our district, because we want to talk about the great things happening in our district, because that's what's, at the end of the day, the best kind of thing for our district. Because when it comes time for things like these building projects and whatnot, if they have no information about our district or a negative perspective of our district, it's difficult to pass those kinds of things, right? And so, when it comes time for, schools of choice, which is a whole nother thing, but if we want to keep the kids that we have and potentially attract kids to come into our district, then we need to be out there promoting ourselves and talking about all the great things that are happening here in Hudsonville. Okay?
And so by media, you include social media.
Oh, absolutely.
Under the media umbrella.
It's
Not just
because that's,
all the way to
and a lot
TV.
of times it's the only media that we have.
Right.
I mean, it used to be, I would never be at a board meeting where there wasn't at least,
Sure.
one reporter in the audience from some board, right? Local newspaper, something. We don't have those local newspapers anymore.
Right.
And so, it's now a lot less common for me to see reporters, at board meetings. And if they are there, then I have to wonder what is going on, because it's not always, Anyway, another story. Okay, staff relations, this is area C, so we're on page 8. So C1 through C7. So that first one, C1, staff feedback, again, that's just like the parent feedback and the community feedback, except now we're talking about staff feedback. So what processes and systems does your superintendent have in place for getting that staff feedback? How often, if ever, do they go to staff meetings and talk to the staff and get their input? How often do they survey the staff and get their input? What process do they use to include staff in the creation of school improvement goals and strategic planning goals and things of that nature? Okay. The one I'd like to focus in on is on the flip side, page 9. It's C7, visibility in district. An effective superintendent consistently visits buildings, classrooms, and special activities. A highly effective superintendent conducts regular and purposeful visits to buildings and classrooms, consistently attends special activities. So I've got an example for you and then a conversation that I had with another superintendent about this. So the example I'm going to give you is I was facilitating an evaluation in a very large school district, and as we were going through that, we got to this issue of visibility in district, and one of the board members spoke up and said, hey, I'm going to be honest with you, Superintendent. A lot of us on here on the board are not happy because we never see you at any of the athletic events in our district. And we think that you need to be more visible at the athletic events in our district. Now again, very large district, to the point where any given night, that superintendent can be anywhere, 15 different places easy, right? The superintendent saw themselves as the academic leader for the district, and the superintendent wasn't really big on athletic events. When there was a football game, the superintendent was at a band concert. When there was a basketball game, the superintendent was at an honors and an honors banquet. When there was a baseball game, the superintendent was at the musical, right? So it's not that the superintendent wasn't visible in the district, it's just that the superintendent wasn't where the board was. Now, some might say that that's an issue because apparently the board wasn't at the musical or the play or the honors banquet. That's another discussion. My point to that board was, though, do you have explicit directions for your superintendent on what that looks like? Have you said to your superintendent, we need to see you at X amount of athletic events, X amount of academic events, X amount of community events? And if you don't have that, then can you honestly, as a board, evaluate them poorly because you didn't see them at athletic events? You didn't let them know that that was an expectation, right? They were at other events. They were definitely visible in the district, just not visible in the way that that board had. So all of that is to say that as a board, you need to make sure that a majority of you, okay, not one of you, not two of you, not three of you, but at least four of you agree that these are our expectations of the superintendent as it relates to visibility in the district, as it relates to fund balance, as it relates to whatever it is, okay? A majority of the board, four of us at least, have to, ideally all seven of us, but at least the majority of the board has to make sure that these are the reasonable expectations we have of our superintendent in whatever area of the evaluation that we're talking about, okay?
Jay, my concern is more the C1 through C6. The rest of these are on staff relations, communication, personnel matters, delegation of duties, recruitment.
Yeah.
A lot of these are things that we as board members don't per se have opportunity to observe firsthand because
Yeah.
how the superintendent leads and runs and oversees the team on a daily basis. So I know we've struggled in the past with it's more of a anecdotal or
Sure.
hearsay type of
Sure.
observation of these. How do we?
Sure. So one of the reasons that I like to use C7 is because I'm going to give you an example right now of how you can get that kind of information from your superintendent as it relates to these kinds of things, okay? So I talked to a retired superintendent and I said to them, I said, okay, so in this area of visibility in the district, when it talks about conducting regular and purposeful visits to a building, what does that look like for you? What does a regular and purposeful visit to a school building look like for you? And she said, she says, I pull up in the parking lot, I get out of the car, she's like, I've got my handy dandy notepad, clipboard, whatever it is, and as I'm walking up to the building, I'm just kind of looking around, okay? Weeds in the parking lot, potholes, lines need to be painted, whatever it is, right? As I walk up to the building, I just kind of take a look around, the facade is hanging off this way, there's weeds over there, whatever it is, right? So I just kind of take notes like that. I come into the building, what am I looking for? Well, we just put that new PBIS program in place. So I'm hoping that I have the appropriate, wall posters are hanging on the walls. How are the kids behaving in the hallways? How are the teachers interacting with the kids in the hallways? Stop in, talk to the building secretaries, because they always know what's going on. So they give me a little bit of what's going on. Sit down with the building principal for a few minutes. Hey, we just put that new reading program in place. So I go in and I check in on that reading program. All right? I got a report that there was a leaky, ceiling in the elementary school classroom, so I go down there and take a look at that, see if that's been done, okay? So I had that checklist, I keep all those things. That's a regular and purposeful visit. That's not just showing up to be seen. That's not like just showing up so somebody can say, hey, the superintendent was in our building today. That's a regular and purposeful visit for being in that building, okay? So if your superintendent can provide to you a recap of the types of things that they normally do when they go on these building visits, that is something we as a board can look at as a piece of evidence and something we as a board can then evaluate on, okay? Now, the other part to this was consistently attend special activities. So I said to her, so how do you do that? And she says, my administrative assistant has access to my calendar, and everything that I do is on my calendar because I have to know where I'm going and when I need to be at this meeting, that meeting, whatever it is. And every week, the admin assistant prints out the calendar, emails it to the board president. The board president can then take a look and report out to the rest of the board. Okay, it looks like he was in this elementary school this day, this elementary school that day, Lions Club, went to the basketball game, went to the football, whatever it is, right? But gets that print out of the calendar so that you can see all the places that they are. And again, that's just another piece of evidence that they can supply to you. Now, he doesn't need to bring all 52 weeks worth of calendars, but just bring an example of a calendar so you can see what a regular normal week if there is ever such a thing, looks like. And then as long as we as a board, can get behind that, then that's fine. When we ask for evidence from our superintendent, we'll talk a little bit more about evidence in a little bit. What I don't want, and I have a lot of superintendents that feel the need to do this, and if that's what they want to do, that's on them. But I don't think that it's necessary that a superintendent come to the evaluation with a 3-ring binder like this, or a flash drive, or a Google Drive, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of evidence to give to all of you. Because I don't know a lot of board members that are going to take the time to read through all of that information. Okay? What I want you to do is be selective. These are the areas in which we as a board are having a tough time evaluating you. We have a tough time evaluating you on visibility in the district because we're not with you. So what can you give us to kind of give us an idea? Well, I can show you this checklist that I use when I come into the buildings. I can share with you my calendar, what a typical week looks like. Okay, we can get behind that, right? If we go back to some of these other ones, if we go back to staff communication, consistently keep staff informed of important matters, develops and ensures implementation of staff communication plan. So all you need to do is just kind of give you a quick rundown. This is the way that I normally communicate with staff. This is how often I send them emails, messages, updates, newsletters. This is how often I visit them in their staff meetings, whatever it is. Just kind of gives you the highlights, right? So that you can see that he has a system in place and is doing these things on a regular basis. Okay? Is there a little bit of us as a board just kind of taking his word for it? Absolutely. That's what we hired him for. We hired him to do the job. So by hiring him to do the job, we believe that he's doing the job. Do we need some evidence on some of these things to help clear it up? Absolutely. We can ask for those. But I don't want us to get so bogged down in the evidence that we're asking for that turns into the main focus of his job. Because the main focus of his job is not collecting evidence for you for evaluation. The main focus of his job is making sure that we are improving the academic opportunities for all the kids in our district. And that is no small task. Okay? Does that help? Mm-hmm. Okay. Moving over to D, business and finance. Pretty straightforward in here. 5 areas: budget development and finance, budget reports, financial controls, facility management, resource allocation. Anything in here jump out at you? Again, not a lot in there, pretty basic, just making sure that you're getting regular updates as to where we are on the budget, that the budget priorities are in line with our strategic planning process, that we have consistent and logical facility updates and facility plans in place so that we're not throwing good money after bad and chasing maintenance around. We know that preventative maintenance is a lot cheaper than having to deal with it when it happens. So, what kinds of processes and plans we have in place there? Are we setting aside appropriate amounts of money, knowing that we have certain things coming up that we're going to have to spend money on? All that kind of stuff. Okay. Anything there, D1 through D5 jump out at you? All right. Last one is E. E1 through E10, instructional leadership, the big kahuna. All right, now one of the things you'll notice is up in the top right part of the page here, we have a weight. It says weight 30%. So this is the highest weighted of the areas. My suggestion to you is when it comes time for that evaluation process, that you have this up in the Excel version. Because if you have this up in the Excel version, as you enter the numbers in this box along here, it's going to do all the calculation for you. So it's going to take care of all those weights and all that kind of stuff. It'll spit out the score at the end. So somebody, on the board, or if you have your administrative assistant as part of the process, somebody should have the spreadsheet open, and as you come to your consensus on the scores, and we'll dig into that in a little bit, just kind of throw those in the boxes, and then that will take care of the weight and figuring out all of those things. E1.
Yeah, I'll just comment that the Excel version is actually pretty good. It's
Yeah.
good to work with.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's very easy. Yeah.
E1 is that performance evaluation system, which we talked about when we went over the legal stuff, making sure that we have that system in place across the district. E7 is that student feedback, which again is just like the teacher feedback, just like the community feedback. Do we have or have we ever considered, or have we talked about having a student representative on our board?
Not seriously. Not
Okay.
seriously.
That is one of the things that we're starting to see more and more across the state, and a lot of that is just because, that's our, that's our bread and butter, the students, right? And so having a student on your board would be a way to get student feedback as to the progress and goals of the district and whatnot. So just something to consider. We do have a lot of resources for that on our website. So if you go to the website and look for Students on Board, I know, catchy title, right? Students on Board, then we have lots of resources about that. Some districts have rotating, they have 4 students and each one takes a different month, or, it's the president, the vice president, the secretary, and the treasurer of the student council, and they just kind of figure out who can attend which meeting. Other ones have a dedicated, member that comes to every board meeting. Can't vote, obviously, doesn't go into closed session when you're talking about contracts and student discipline, all that kind of stuff. But it's here for these kinds of training sometimes, but it's definitely here for the meetings and has an opportunity to say, hey, this is what we're hearing from the students, and what I'm hearing from the students, things of that nature. So just something to think about. E8, talking about student attendance, like we talked about. And then the one that I want to focus in on is this last one, E10, professional knowledge. Effective, demonstrates knowledge of current instructional programs, able to discuss them, seeks to learn and improve upon personal and professional abilities, holds and maintains appropriate superintendent certification. Highly effective, demonstrates knowledge of and comfort explaining current instructional programs, participates actively in professional groups and organizations for the benefit of the district and personal and professional growth, holds and maintains appropriate superintendent certification. Now, it is your responsibility as a board to make sure that your one employee has the appropriate and up-to-date certification, okay? It is up to your superintendent to make sure that everybody else in the district has their appropriate certification. So for you as a board, it's as simple as just, working with your superintendent to make sure that you're supporting him in his professional development. And I saw him at the MASA conference. We had a lovely conversation, so I know he was there. Making sure that you have set aside money for his attendance at that, and set aside money for his participation in MASA and maybe the National Association as well. I'm sure there's stipulations in this contract, all of that. And then just saying, when's your certification up? What are you doing to make sure you're maintaining that? What classes are you taking, or what webinars whatever it is, how you get your sketches, right? Because that's what it comes down to. Because if you as a board employ a non-certified superintendent, then it is you as a board and as a district that are going to be on the hook for the fine that the state is going to assign. Now, it used to be a fine equivalent to 1 year's salary. They've since stepped that back a little bit, and they're basically going to say, get it done, right? Get your superintendent up to certification requirements, and if they come back and check and you haven't done it again, then they will hit you with a fine. Although they've said that I don't know if they set a limit on it or not, but it's not the equivalent to the superintendent's salary anymore. But
you're gonna have to worry for 2025, and I already have enough credits to go to 2030. So
there you go. Perfect. Perfect. What happens a lot of times is it's not necessarily that the superintendents aren't certified, it's that they have a misunderstanding because there's some really interesting quirks in the certification system that happened several years ago. And so I know this happened in a district in which the board called me up and said, we found out that our superintendent had misinterpreted the evaluation law and thought that they were qualified under the old regs. And it turns out that they weren't. And so what can we do? And I said, well, as quickly as possible, get them enrolled in some classes and get them up to snuff, and you should be okay. The state is usually, if they find out, they're usually pretty, get it done, but don't worry about it. And then I got a call a couple of weeks later. I'm saying, hey, we're going to do a superintendent search. I'm like, well, what happened? And they said, well, they found out that not only was the superintendent not certified, none of the central office were certified either, because they were all working under that same misinterpretation. And then they found out that they had several building administrators in the district that were also not carrying current certification, again, because of misinterpretation of that. And so they just decided that, this is clearly not an effective education setup. And so, yeah. Any questions there, E1 through E10? Okay. Let me get this back online here. Okay, so you'll notice that at the bottom of each of these pages is an opportunity for some comments from the board, some comments from the superintendent. So you can put that on your final copy. We'll get to what that looks like in a little bit. Then as we continue to go through the instruments, so part F, so if you know Excel, then you know that this hashtag div/0 exclamation point, that's what Excel throws in there when there's no numbers in there and they're looking for numbers, so that's their error code. So if you were putting numbers in, then this is where it would have all those numbers for the category, the weights and everything, and then it would have this adjusted score at the bottom. And then you put your student growth rating in here, you put your progress towards district-wide goals in here. And then here it's going to, again, the Excel version will fill out the professional practice, which is everything in the evaluation instrument, and then the student growth, and then the progress towards district-wide goals, and then it will give the total score divided by 4, and then it's going to give that rating. So 90 to 100% highly effective, 75 to 89 effective, 60 to 74 minimally effective, less than 60 ineffective. So again, when you use the Excel version, it's going to do all that fancy-dancy math for you. Okay? Appendix A is the research base. Appendix B talks about the process, which we'll get to. Appendix C talks about conducting the formal evaluation conference. To that. D is considerations related to closed meeting, timeline, establishing evidence. We'll get to all of this, but that's just what's in the rest of the instrument, student growth, training, all that kind of good stuff. Okay, let's get back to the PowerPoint here. All right, we've looked at all of the areas. Okay, so across the bottom of those areas, you'll see these little bullet point lists. Those are possible artifacts of evidence that you can consider. I had a board call me up one time and they're like, so do we have to have all these things for each one of these areas? It's like, no. These are just some examples of things that you could have. So meeting minutes, board packets, memos, policy review calendar, those are just examples. We encourage the use of evidence to help turn this into more of a subjective evaluation. We want to have those pieces of evidence to help reduce bias. Items generated by the superintendent provide evidence of meeting the goals. We want to work with the superintendent to reach consensus on the evidence-based data that we're going to use, and multiple sources should be used where appropriate. What we are not going to do, as we talked about earlier, is really just wallop him with all these requirements and requests of all this evidence that we want as a board. We're also not going to wait until the last minute to ask for all this. So we'll talk about the planning process in a little bit, but ideally, when we start the planning process at the very beginning of the cycle, that's when we're going to establish the kind of evidence that we want him to collect, because he's going to need to be keeping track of that stuff during that entire evaluation cycle. Okay? If you can count it, you'll be able to proof, data, dollar, students' time, records that change, that things have changed. If you can see it, you'll be looking for visible signs, plans, paperwork, schedules, records indicating things have occurred or are going to occur. Those 5 categories, Appendix H in your evaluation instrument lists like 121 or something like that, possible artifacts of evidence. It is not an all-inclusive list, okay? I don't think any of you are looking to look at all 121 articles of evidence there. I don't think the superintendent's looking to collect all 121 articles of evidence there. Suffice it to say that for each of these 5 categories, there is an artifact of evidence that exists that's going to help us gain some clarity on that. But we just need to be mindful and respectful and deliberate about about what it is that we ask for as it relates to evidence. Okay? Any questions on evidence?
So in advance of the evaluation being completed, how would the evidence typically work? Is it individual board members reaching out saying, hey, I'd like to see this, or is it the board collectively?
It's going to be up to us as a board to come to consensus on what evidence it is that we think we need to see. And then when the superintendent provides to us their self-evaluation, they'll provide to us at that time the evidence to kind of back up their self-evaluation. And then you as individual board members can reach out to get clarity on anything. So if you see anything in there that you're just not quite sure, you know, you understand what it is, then you can get clarity at that point. And then we'll all come back together as a whole board and conduct the evaluation. Okay?
So Jay, we should always have Dr. Vanderjack self-eval before we
Yes.
complete the eval.
Yep, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes.
So Jay, are there evidence that the board receives on a regular basis that I would then resend them prior to that time?
Yeah, so there's going to be some that you could, you know, that you maybe.
There's evidence all the time.
Absolutely. So yes, you could be reporting that out to them throughout the year, and then you could either, you know, point them back to. So remember, for evidence, you know, let's go back to this, this, and this, or you could, you know, collect it all as you're sending it, and then represent it to them at the end if you know put it on a drive, and we're just kind of setting it aside throughout the year so they could then refer back to it. That would be appropriate as well. I had a superintendent that had all the information on a table, and as the board members had questions, board members said, well, you know, I don't remember seeing that. 1 second. Pulls out the copy of the email, distributes the email to all the board members, and the board member looks at the email and is like, oh, I'm sorry, I must have missed this. Okay, thank you. And so, you know, the superintendent had that information on hand because the superintendent had anticipated that those were going to be some of the issues or some of the things that they had wanted. But we're hoping that it doesn't get to that point. We're hoping that we just have this nice, clear communication as to this is the evidence that we're expecting. He presents that to you as part of the self-evaluation. You get your answers for anything that you need clarity on, and we move forward from that.
And we're a little, I'll just comment, I think we've trued up the goals. I think we've trued up the academic performance, which we've talked about. The pieces of evidence is an area that we have been lacking, and that we haven't done quite, we're not quite experimental, but I think that's still something that we can do prior to, as another schedule to the board. I think we can still true that up and.
Yeah, and
set
so
the
all we
stage
need
for
to
going
do,
forward,
right,
so.
what we're going to need to do at this point, though, is just remember that we're in the, October's over next week, right? Halloween's next week. So, you know, we're coming close to the end of October. If we're doing this evaluation in December, we just need to be mindful that, you know, we haven't been talking about, you know, these particular pieces of evidence. We didn't talk to the superintendent about collecting this evidence back in January, February, which would have been ideal. So we just need to be a little bit more accepting of the fact that we have this shorter time frame and that there may not be time to gather everything that we're looking for. And so just be mindful of what we're asking for based on that time.
Certainly sets it up for next year.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. So again, remembering that this is a developmental process, that we're looking to help further develop the knowledge and the skills of the superintendent, that we're looking to clarify performance expectations, that we're doing this evaluation in order to provide that mechanism for feedback, and that this is helping us link the superintendent's work to the goals that we've set for the district. This planning, period, this planning, that hopefully, again, if we're doing this fall evaluation, you know, this November, December, then this would ideally happen kind of in the January, February-ish range. The nice thing, if we could tie this into our organizational meeting, because remember, at our organizational meeting, we're setting all the dates for the rest of the year, right? And so we could set the dates for these evaluation updates as well. So we're going to set our evaluation timeline, our key dates, we'll set our performance goals, we'll set those appropriate benchmarks and checkpoints. We'll talk about the artifacts of evidence that we'd like him to collect throughout the year. We'll talk about how we're going to compile the year-end evaluation, and then how we're going to conduct the evaluation conference. Now, I believe, well, correct me if I'm wrong, do we have an evaluation committee, or do we do this all as just, okay. So some districts have an evaluation committee which they'll collect all the artifacts of evidence and collect the self-evaluation, all that, and then report that back out to the rest of the board, and then the whole board will do the evaluation. But it sounds like we're all handling that as a committee of the whole. That is just fine. Okay. Evaluation cycle. We start by defining our performance expectations. So this helps clarify what it is that we, as a board, are expecting of our superintendent. We establish those priorities for his work. We provide that clear statement of board support for the work that's being done. These are our expectations. Explicit expectations. So we know exactly what it is that we're supposed to be doing throughout this evaluation cycle. Provide that clear statement of board support, and then provide that accountability framework. So our district goals are the base of all of this. They're the base on which our key working goals of the Board of Education, our superintendent performance standards and goals, our school improvement plans, our district staff performance, our standards and goals are all based off of that district goals, and it's all in moving us in that forward direction. We need to make sure that everybody is clear on what's in the rubric, which is what we talked about tonight, that you're all clear on the district-wide improvement goals and how we're going to measure progress on those goals. So whether it be school improvement goals, strategic planning goals, whatever it is, and then how we're measuring progress. And then we have to make sure that we all have clarity on the student growth measure being used. Okay? When we talk about that performance area in which we need some additional clarity, then we need to make sure that we ask the superintendent, what are we going to see next year towards improvement that we don't see this year? What's that change going to look like? What measure will we use to know that that difference represents meaningful progress? Give them some time to put together an answer for us, and then start putting together some SMART goal statements. I'm sure you're all familiar with the SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. If we have a SMART goal of increasing reading proficiency, X amount of percentage points, whatever it is, that's specific. We will increase reading proficiency by X amount of percentage points. It's measurable. Yes, we can measure reading proficiency. It's attainable. We'll make sure that the goal that we set is attainable. It's relevant. States made it relevant, right, with our third grade reading scores. And then it's time-based. It's going to happen over this period of time. Then we get into monitoring for progress. So how are we going to monitor this progress? How is it going to be measured? How are we measuring that reading proficiency? What's the baseline? This is where we started. This is where we're hoping to end. When will that data be available to check our progress? What's the expected change? Have we established logical checkpoints? Then we get into that regular two-way feedback that we talked about. This can be both informal and formal. Okay. Generally, we start this process with the superintendent filling out a self-evaluation. So the superintendent's going to go through the instrument, and they're going to rate themselves in all of the areas in the instrument. Okay? Halves and wholes. No quarter points, no eighth points. It's a 1, it's a 1.5, it's a 2, it's a 2.5, it's a 3, it's a 3.5, it's a 4. Okay? That's it. Wholes and halves only. All right? Once the superintendent has completed that self-evaluation, he will then share it with all of you along with the Google Drive, the flash drive, the 3-ring binder, whatever it is. So you all have that in front of you. I then suggest that you print off a copy of the evaluation instrument. Now, on our website, there's 2 copies. There's a PDF version and there's an Excel version. The PDF version prints out, that's what this is that you all have in front of you. That's the PDF version. So you all have one. Use that one. So sit down with the superintendent's self-evaluation on one side of you. Sit down with your evaluation on the other side. Have the evidence there. As you go through his self-evaluation and you come across those areas in which you have a different rating, one way or the other, make a note. If you see that he's got himself down as a 4 in A1 and you think that that's appropriate, you can either put down a 4 yourself or just ignore that one and just move on to the next one. Okay? And so as you go through it and see those areas in which you have a disagreement, then make it. Sometimes you're going to think, okay, he put himself down as a 4. I think it's probably a 3.5, and then I might make a note here as to why, so that when I have that evaluation meeting, I can remember. Instead of, oh, wait, why did I think that was a 3.5? Okay, so make your note as you go through. Conversely, you may see the superintendent has himself down as a 3, and you may think, oh man, he's being way too hard on himself. He did fantastic. I think this is probably closer to a 4. I'm going to put a 4 here, and again, I'm going to make my note so that when we have that meeting, I remember why I thought he was a 4. Okay? So you'll go through and do that for the entire evaluation instrument. All right? You will then convene as a board, and if the superintendent requests it, you'll do it in a closed session. When I facilitate, this is what I do. I come into closed session with the board, I sit down with the superintendent's self-eval in front of me, I have the Excel version up on my laptop, okay? And I tell the board, okay, so we're gonna start this meeting tonight, we're gonna go through the evaluation instrument, we're gonna have all the discussion here in closed session. And again, that's only if the superintendent requests it, and it's only if a majority of the board votes to go into closed session. Now, generally speaking, if an employee asks to go into closed session to discuss their evaluation, as a board, we generally just accept that as courtesy and vote 7-0 to go in. So we're now in closed session, okay? Board, I'm going to remind you that in closed session, we're only in closed session to discuss the evaluation. If we start discussing things that are not relevant to the evaluation, I'm going to give you about that much space. And if it continues, then I'm going to ask the superintendent to bring us out of closed session, and then we'll have all the discussion you want in open session. And then when you're done, we'll go back into closed session, because we're only in closed session to discuss the evaluation instrument, okay? The superintendent can bring us out of closed session at any time during this meeting. Anytime that he's ready to go back into open session, all he has to say is, Mr. President, please put forth a motion to bring us out of closed session. I'm done, I'm ready to go, okay? All right. So we're in closed session, we're going to have the discussion. A1 here, policy involvement. I see the superintendent has himself down here as a 4. I'm just going to kind of look around the room. No one's really saying much of anything, so I'm just going to kind of take that silence as, okay, everyone's okay with a 4 here. So I'm just going to make a note, okay? A2. Okay, superintendent has himself down here as a 3.5. Okay, not really hearing anything. All right, boom, I just make a note, 3.5. Information. Superintendent has himself down here as a 4. Barb says, well, you know, there were quite a few times throughout the year when I thought maybe he could have done a better job at communicating this, I was kind of leaning more towards a 3. Ken says, yeah, you know, I was kind of maybe at a 3.5. And so as your facilitator, I'd say, okay, so I'm hearing 3, 3.5, so I want to make a note, okay? Any other discussion around this one? Okay, all right. And I'll do that for all of the areas, A1 through A6, and then we'll go into B, then we'll go into C and D and E, all the way through, then we'll do student growth, then we'll do goal statements. If I come across an area in which I'm not able to bring you to consensus, so for instance, if in materials and background A4, 4 of you are at a 4, and 3 of you are at a 1, okay? That's a pretty wide divergence there. We'll have some discussion, see if we can figure out why we have such a wide divergence here, of 4 of you at a 4 and 3 of you are at a 1. And if we can't come to a reasonable consensus, I'm going to put a pin in that one and come back to it. We'll continue on through the rest of the evaluation, and then we'll come back to those ones we kind of put a pin in. And what I've found is that this kind of de-escalates that a little bit. Lets us get through all those points in which we have pretty close agreement on, and then we can go back to those ones that we were having some issues with and have a discussion. If after the discussion, after a reasonable amount of time in the discussion, I've come to determine that there's just no way, as your facilitator, that I'm going to bring you to consensus on this one, then we're just going to go old school. Majority thinks it's a 4, it's a 4, okay? What I'm not going to do, I'm not going to average, okay? And the reason that we don't average is because this instrument was built on consensus. And if we use averaging, then we run the risk of invalidating the instrument. What happens if we invalidate the instrument? Well, hopefully nothing. But there's always the possibility that if we invalidate the instrument, someone comes forth and says, I don't think that was a fair evaluation. I don't accept this evaluation because we used averaging. That invalidates the instrument. And I don't want to put a board in this situation where something like that gets debated back and forth. That's not a good place to be. So if we can't come to consensus, I'm going to go old school. Now, I haven't had to use that, but maybe once or twice that I can think of, and I've facilitated a lot of evaluations, okay? Every now and again it comes up, but it's very rare. One of the things we have to remember as we're going through this evaluation is, and I see this happen a lot, is boards get fixated, or a board member maybe gets fixated on one particular instance. And because of that one particular instance, wants to completely torpedo that particular indicator. Okay, we're talking about a year-long evaluation cycle. And if there's only one instance in which communication was really bad, I don't think that justifies a 1 on a 4-point scale. Okay? If it's 10 instances of communication issues, okay, now we're talking about something, right? Because that's 10 times it happened over the year. But if it was only one, there's one particular case that we're talking about, and that's the only one that anyone can come up with, I don't know that that's really enough to bring it all the way down. The other reason that I don't want to average is because a majority of the board thinks that the superintendent is effective in this area. I'm not going to give a minority of the board more weight in this discussion, okay? Because a majority of the board believes a 4 is appropriate. Maybe I can convince that majority to come down to a 3, and I can convince those ones to come up to a 3, and if we can all come to consensus on a 3, okay. Not ideal, but okay, we can come to consensus on a 3. We'll make this an area of focus for next year, make sure the superintendent understands what those 3 board members had an issue with, and we'll see if we can fix that for the next year. But I'm not going to bring it from a 4 down to a 2. I'm not going to bring it from a 4 down to a 1. Not when a majority of the board thinks that it's a 4. Does that make sense? Okay? So we'll go through all of that. Once we've had all the discussion, we'll close it up with, okay, any final thoughts on the evaluation process before we go into open session? Because remember, we can't make any decisions or determinations in closed session, and we're not going to have any discussion in open session. So I want to make sure that we've had all the discussion around these things that we wanted to have in closed session, and once we're comfortable that we've discussed everything that we wanted to discuss, we'll ask the superintendent to bring us out of closed session. We'll come into open session. When we come into open session, again, I will start with my Excel spreadsheet there. I will take a look at my notes, and I'll be like, okay, so based on our discussion, and remember, no discussion, we already had that in closed session. Based on our discussion, A1, I think that was a 4. Looking around, okay, good. A2, I think we finally came around to a 3.5 on that one. Okay, good. All right, A3, I think that one sounded like me, that was a 4. Well, I think maybe it was more like a 3.5. Yeah, I think it was probably 3.5. Well, I had a 3, okay. 3.5, the 3.5 sound good? Everyone okay with the 3.5? Yeah, okay, good, 3.5. And we'll just go through, and we're just qualifying every one of those numbers in open session.
But isn't just a 3, 3.5, isn't that discussion in open session?
No, because all we're doing is validating the score. We're just validating the score. We're not going to go into whys and how whats. We're going to be like, just based on discussion, based on everything we talked about, I think it was probably closer to a 3.5. And then everyone else can kind of chime in with that, right? Yeah, I think you're probably right, a 3.5 or a 3. I'd be happy with a 3 on this one. I think it's a 3. Okay, can we all come to consensus on a 3.5? So we can talk about the score a little bit in open session, but we're not going to get into the weeds on the whys and everything because we had all of that discussion in closed session. So now we're just making sure that we're all on board and all on consensus with what the final rating is going to be. Okay? All right? So then after we go through the entire instrument and have everything in the Excel spreadsheet, it's going to spit out that score, and we can either choose to adopt it right there on the spot, or if we want, we can put a pin in it. We can bring it back to the next board meeting, and between those 2 meetings, we can finalize any of the notes that we want to have on that evaluation instrument. We can allow the superintendent to provide any final notes that he wants to make sure are part of that evaluation instrument. Because we use consensus, the only instrument that is foiable is that one final instrument where we've all come to consensus on the scores. If we do averaging, then every one of your individual instruments become foible. But if we do consensus, then it's only that final instrument that we've all come to agree on and vote on as the final evaluation. That is the only one that is subject to foil.
Our practice has been, and I think you're actually streamlining it and simplifying it, because our practice has been closed session, go through everything, summarize, so kind of a summary, intermediate document, that gets reviewed and voted on in open session. You're going, well, why bother do this? Just do that, use that form, go through the scores, agree to that, and then.
And I was talking to one of my colleagues that does a lot of these as well, and I tend to lean more on transparency than anything else. So that's one of the reasons that I go category by A1, A2, A3.
Yeah.
He tends to go, okay, so based on everything we talked about, in the area of A, I've got a 3.8578213 because when you put the numbers in there, it's going to spit out that bottom.
Right.
And so he just has them adopt the final score for each of the areas.
Okay.
which is completely fine.
Okay.
For transparency, I like to go through each of the items one by one, come to consensus on each of the items one by one. And because we had all that discussion in closed session, the open session portion of it usually ticks right along.
Okay.
Okay? As long as whoever's facilitating was listening and hearing everything and making sure that they, because if I come across when A4, I was hearing that was a 4, when in the discussion, everyone was talking about it as a 1 or a 2, well, then clearly I wasn't paying attention. And so I want to make sure that we go through and we come to consensus on all those, so. Okay.
So Jay, just for clarification, when we're in closed session, do we come to an agreement on the rating?
We come to an agreement, okay? So again, we're just gonna kind of rough it out a little bit. And so, superintendent's got himself down here as a 4, where are all of you? And again, no discussion, that I'm just kind of taking that 4 as accepted, right? Superintendent had himself down as a 4. I'm starting to hear some 3s and 3.5s. So I'm just gonna kind of make a note. Okay, it sounds like it's more like a 3 or 3.5. And then when we come into open session, we're gonna qualify that and really nail it down as to what we came to consensus on.
We
So-
don't do that in closed session?
In closed session, we're just gonna kind of get an idea of where we are. We're probably around a 4. Some of them will be clear, because if he says he's a 4 and there's no discussion, well then, yeah, that's probably gonna be a 4, right? If he says a 4 or a 3 and there's a little bit of discussion about it being a 3.5 or a 2 or whatever, then when we come into open session, we'll qualify and come to consensus on exactly what it is that we think that score is.
But then that's really incumbent on board members to go, okay, how much, he was a 4, or he was a 1, how much am I willing to give, where am I at? Because
Right,
because
exactly.
we're not gonna go back and say, I'm not gonna come out and say, well, I think he's a 1, because of this, in open session.
Not an open session.
Not an
We're
open
gonna have that
session.
discussion in closed session.
Closed
And if we
session.
start to get into some discussion in open session, then the superintendent's probably gonna say, okay, if we're gonna do discussion, I'm gonna ask that we go back into closed session, and if we need to, we can go back into closed session, we can suss it all out, we can have that discussion, and then we can reconvene in open session and continue where we left off. And so that's why we do everything we can to make sure that we've squared away all our discussion in closed session, so that when we come into open session, we can just roll right on through all those numbers and get on. Okay? All right. So prior to the meeting, as we talked about, superintendent's going to prepare the self-eval. You'll get any clarity. So as you're going through his self-eval and the evidence, if you have any questions, or reach out to the superintendent, get answers to any of that. You'll get your blank evaluation instrument. Superintendent will present the self-evaluation evidence. You'll notice the big green box here that talks about MASB recommends the superintendent remain in the room with the board for the entire meeting. So some boards in past practices have dismissed the superintendent from a portion of the closed session so they can talk about the superintendent without them there. We don't recommend that you do that because, well, he can't fix what he doesn't know is broken. So if there are issues, you need to let him know what those issues are so that he can address them. So just do it right there with him in the room. The other thing to consider is that if the only person that can call for a closed session is no longer in the closed session, can you really still be in closed session? I don't know. Not a lawyer, but I don't know that that's a place that you want to put yourselves as a board. Okay, so recommendation, keep them there for the entire meeting. Board president or whoever is facilitating it will review with the Board of Education the self-eval and the evidence. We'll assign scores. We're going to use a consensus model. We're going to discuss each performance indicator. The board president will calculate or let Excel do it for you. All the scores. We'll review the scores. We'll assign a score to district-wide goals. We'll talk about growth. We'll assign a score for growth. We'll identify themes and trends. So as we're going through this evaluation instrument, if, for instance, we happen to notice that all the areas in which a superintendent scored lower than normal were in areas of, say, communication. Every time we talked about communication, it was consistently a 2 or a 2.5 or a 3. Everything else was a 4 or a 3.5, but communication was. So that's going to be a theme or a trend that we'll identify when it comes time for our planning for next year's evaluation. Okay, remember, last year's evaluation, we seem to have a lot of issues around communication. So what can we do this year to focus in on improving communication? Okay, and that's just an example. Another example would be if in 4 of the 5 areas, they're consistently scoring 3.5 or 4, but that 5th area, whether it be the finance area or the personnel area or whatever it is, we tend to be more in the 2s and 3s, then that would be an area of focus for next year. So hey, 4 out of 5 areas, you're killing it, but this particular area, you tend to score a little bit lower, so let's work on that area for next year. So that's what we talk about when we talk about themes or trends. That's what we're talking about. As whoever's facilitating the process for you, when I'm facilitating the process, I usually kind of keep notes along the way, because if I start to hear the same thing come up again and again and again, okay, I'll make sure I make note of that, right? I heard them say communication like 15 times, so obviously we have some issues around communication. And I always say communication because, well, that's the one that I hear most often, right? Communication between board and soup, communication between soup and staff, communication between board, soup, and community, parents, whatever. Communication tends to be that hot button one, so that's why I use it as my example. Okay, superintendent will note his or her comments. Board president, superintendent sign that completed evaluation form. We cannot ensure the reliability of the instrument when you average. We talked about that. Averaging 5, 7, 9 board members, however many board members you have, does not reflect the view of the majority of the Board of Education, and it doesn't give clear direction to the superintendent. That completed evaluation reflects the board's assessment of the superintendent's performance. We want to work with the superintendent to coordinate a public statement if that's something that you want to do. When it comes to closed meeting, we talked about this already. Staff member, if named person requests, you can always go into closed session at the request of your superintendent. You can then request that closed hearing. They rescind the request at any time, so he can call you out of closed session at any time. During the open phase, we can schedule, we can choose to modify, we can establish performance goals, we can determine the process, adopt, vote, related board actions and discussions. In closed, we can only discuss and deliberate about the evaluation. Okay, so when we're in closed session, we're only discussing and deliberating the evaluation. That's it. When we come back in open session, board president reads aloud the scores for each of the areas. Board president calls for a vote to adopt. There's your evaluation process. Any questions about the process? Okay.
Why isn't the rubric written as an 8-point frame that's going to be half points?
I don't know.
Because it would seem that there's a clear distinction between a 3 and a 4, and what you do, but you can award a 3.5, which doesn't fall under either one.
Yeah, so my understanding from the developers of the evaluation tool was that if they were going to give a little bit of flexibility for consensus, that halves and wholes were appropriate, which is why we don't get into 8ths and quarters and everything else along those lines. So in order to create a little bit of an opening for consensus, if we've got someone who's at a 4, someone who's at a 3, and we all come to consensus on a 3.5, then that is something that they've determined is permissible within the tool.
That seems like averaging.
Not a psychometrician.
I was a math teacher, so it's
Not a psychometrician.
Jay,
All right. So,
is
yeah.
is that in regards to coming to consensus on the board, or when we're doing like our own eval, we could say, oh, we think 3.5 is appropriate?
Yeah, you can think of 3.5 is appropriate, and then when we talk about it, if we find that 6 of us are at a 4 and one of us is at a 3.5, well, I mean, I guess I can agree with a 4. That's fine. Everyone else thinks it's a 4. I can come to consensus on a 4. If there's 2 or 3 of us at a 3.5, and the other 4 at a 4, let's talk a little bit about it. I hear what you're saying, Barbara. I see what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, I could live with a 3.5. And so that's the thing. We want to just come to consensus on this and make sure that we're there together. So if we have that fall evaluation, which is what we're talking about, January is when we're going to set our expectations and our schedule. April would be a nice time for an informal update. June would be a good time for a more formal discussion. We're closing out the school year. This is how the school year looking like. It's going to close out, et cetera, et cetera. August, informal update. This is what the beginning of the school year is looking like. This is what enrollment's looking like. This is how far we've gone now that we're 3/4 of the way through this evaluation process. This is the progress we've made on these goals and things of that nature. And then doing that evaluation in kind of that November, December timeframe. When we have these check-ins, we're going to revisit our expectations. We're going to discuss the extent to which those expectations have been met. We'll inquire about any barriers that are preventing things from happening. We'll, frame our feedback in very simple terms. Continue to do this, do more of this, do less of that. That January workshop, when we set our expectations, we document our expectations, and we schedule our dates. It might be helpful to have these things at that meeting, superintendent's job description or policy, a current copy of their contract, board policies and procedures that relate to SuperVal, current district-wide improvement plan or strategic plan, our growth model, our performance goals, a blank copy of the instrument, and then our board planning calendar, because again, we're going to make sure that we set these meetings. April, informal update, as we talked about. June, more formal update. August, another informal update. Greater focus on status of the district, new school year initiatives, enrollment, funding projections, like we talked about.
Jay, when you talk
Yeah.
about formal and informal, so like informal, are you just saying like at a board meeting or a work session, they look at their goals and they just give an update going down?
Informal could be an email to the board, it could be part of the weekly or bi-weekly announcement to the board, it could be part of the superintendent's report at the board meeting, right? Just a very informal. The formal updates can be more of a full-on, presentation. Hey, we're halfway through the evaluation cycle, this is what things are looking like, we're just a more formal presence of that. And that's not only for you, that's for everybody else that's here as well, to see what progress is being made towards the evaluation of the superintendent, okay?
Thank you.
Absolutely. So these are the 3 cycles that we're seeing most districts on. So you're kind of in this January to December right here. July, June, this is mostly for our ISD superintendents. And then that March, April there. I gotta fix that. I keep forgetting to fix that slide. It should be March, April, not April, March. But anyway, that is the way that we used to evaluate superintendents, and some districts still do. And that was mostly tied into that 90-day notice that they had to give their superintendent that they were not going to renew their contract. We believe that moving to this, or having it in that January, December, the advantage there, as it says at the bottom, it aligns with the election cycle. So any of those new members that are elected in November, sworn in January, are then part of the process for almost an entire year before evaluating the superintendent. If you do it in that March, April timeframe, they've only been on the board for a handful of months, and all of a sudden they're expected to evaluate the superintendent, okay? If you have any board members that are new board members that are elected in November, then my recommendation for them for training is we have monthly webinars. So have those new board members attend one of those monthly webinars, and then that will qualify them as trained. If you get to a point where you're doing the evaluation process and you have a board member that has not been trained in the evaluation process, our recommendation then, they can participate in the process, but we would suggest that you don't have them vote when it comes time for approving that final rating. And again, that's just to protect you from somebody coming back and say, well, that was not a valid process because one of those people wasn't trained, right? So they can participate, they can be part of the process, but when it comes time to say, we as a board, based on the evaluation, find the superintendent to be highly effective, have a vote, have them abstain from that vote because they've not been trained yet, okay? All right, so those were our learning targets for tonight. We talked about superintendent job performance, we talked about artifacts of evidence, we talked about a cycle, we talked about checkpoints, we talked about the instrument itself. Questions, concerns, things we didn't cover, things I covered too quickly, things I garbled because I've been talking for the past 5 days. It's a good conference. It's a good conference. And I'm happy to be with you all tonight. Other questions I can answer for you?
Again, the maturing into that, the cadence throughout the year, certainly a target for us, and then making sure we have the evidence, that we talk about. We haven't put as much emphasis on that in the past, but I think it's certainly a good takeaway for me as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the timing? Can you all remind me what the timing is for the evaluation?
Yep. So our current timing, and again, you have this in an email, but I can
Yep.
send it out.
Yep.
November 7th, the week of November 7th, evaluation sent to the board to fill out individually. November 18th, evaluations returned to me for summarizing. Now you're kind of coaching that summarize in the closed session. Thank you.
And that's gonna save.
I'm walking out of this.
That's gonna save you some work there, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we give a little more time perhaps
Right.
for the collecting of evidence and for the self-evaluation. So I just may push that back to November 18th. And then November 28th, targeted for the closed session and consensus of input. And then we had December 8th as a regular meeting to go through the evaluation of the public input. So we had that broken up versus trying to squeeze it all into one 4 or 5 hour meeting. Any
Well,
concerns about that, or?
Generally, usually when I do facilitate it, and I can usually get it down to 2.5 to 3.
Yeah.
And that is one of the nice things about having a facilitator,
Yeah.
is that, they can help direct and keep
Right.
everybody kind of on task, and it takes the onus off the board president from having to facilitate, or the superintendent from having to facilitate their own evaluation. Now, that's not to say that it may not go longer, but generally speaking, again, facilitator can kind of bring everyone along and just kind of keep the discussion focused and to make sure that we're talking just about evaluation and that we're not going off into too many tangents.
Yeah, and also, I find as board president that you're kind of thinking about what you're doing and not as involved in the discussion as perhaps you'd like to be. Yeah. So, we'll do that summation in the closed session on the 28th then. And we'll allow for more time for evidence, this is my thinking again, chime in board, if you think that, we'll allow a little more time for evidence collecting, and I'll send out a note to get some input on that. And then, me summarizing beforehand, we'll just do that in the meeting. It'll make us more efficient, effective, and
If you have any questions along the way, if you have any things that come up, you think of something after you go home tonight or whatever, you can always reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have around evaluation or around the process, or more details about facilitated evaluation, whatever you want. You know how to get a hold of me. If you don't have anything else for me tonight, then I'll turn it back over to the board president.
any other questions or comments?
I appreciate your reminder of focusing on those rubrics and how you said it was this, and it's a good way to look at that and to keep us focused on what it is we're actually evaluating. And I like the check-in phrase where it said feedback can be framed in simple terms. Continue to do this, do more of, or do less of, and keeping it within categories like that versus sort of going off in tangents, as you said.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you. I thought this was very helpful.
I'm glad to hear that. You're very welcome.
Yeah, I agree. I've been through it before, but this was just a great refresher. It was really helpful, so. Sure. Good. There's something else? Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you, Jay.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Jay. We really appreciate your time, your energy, the information, your expertise. We appreciate it a lot, and your drive over from.
Oh, no problem.
From Grand.
I mean, on a day like today, I'm not going to get many more of these kinds of days to drive over.
No. Next time we call you, it will be snowing or something.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, we will do a board roundtable, and then we'll go ahead and adjourn. So, Mr. Tuttle, what do you think? Good.
I'm good, thank you.
I'm good.
All set?
Good. Okay. With that, may I have a motion and a second to adjourn, please? Motion by Chad Tuttle, support from Ron Stephen. All in favor, please say aye.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.